How's it going, everybody? I'm just going to go ahead and get started. We're still waiting for the game to load. For some reason, it is still compiling shaders, which is weird. I don't know if Vic 3 had an update or what, but it's very odd. Let me know if my mic's weird, as usual. I'm always changing it. How's it going, everybody? We're going to be continuing the Qing game today. I will be mainly playing, probably not ranting. Stream also will not be that long, probably 2, maybe top 3 hours. Turns out I have something going on with someone later today, which I need to prioritize, so I'll be doing that. But I think we'll have enough time to get a little bit into the Qing game. It's been really interesting seeing Britain completely abandon the Opium event chain, which I've actually never had that happen. To be fair, I've only done like one long-term Qing game before. I've done a couple shorter ones, but every time I've like played an Asia game or when I've played Qing China, Britain has always done the Opium Wars. Like, I know there is the path for them not to do it, but getting to play that out, I think, will be actually very, very, very interesting. I still don't know why it's compiling shaders. So I think for this game overall, like I said, I'm not going to do pure roleplay. I'm not going to do pure metagame. We're just going to kind of take it as it is. But generally speaking, not having to deal with the Opium Wars means we actually have a shot at industrializing and potentially opening up trade policy and internal reform without just, constantly basically getting our teeth kicked in by every European power who has any semblance of a country. It wasn't quite that bad, but I mean, it was pretty bad. Hopefully this save still works. I was kind of having fun this week playing some single player Sweden, so hopefully that hasn't screwed over anything. I don't think it should, just in case. How's it going, Magus? It's a Bombadil, it's Basis, some Duolingo. Shingling. All right, we do still have our save, I hope. As you can see, I played a lot of Sweden. It's fine. I think that's the save, right? It is. 7 days ago. Is the reason you have Jesus background loading screen because you look like Jesus? Jesus background loading screen. You'll have to let me know what the background loading screen is for that. Yeah, I went really far. I did a Sweden game this week. It was fun. I was like, what happens if I fully embrace the springtime of revolutions and just fully go wherever the political movements take me? Initially, it worked very well. I got very early reform laws, industrialization up the ass. It was going great until the socialist movement, the liberal movement, and the anarchist movement in Sweden all got into a deadlock. And it was, the factions were so kind of like separated that I couldn't get any one of those blocks to get in charge and actually have, what's it called? Legislative ability, because their political rigidity was so low. So initially, like the reform movements were great, but then it just got into deadlock and nothing was happening and I couldn't pass any laws. Still industrialized. I had like, I think the biggest company in the world in that game, which was pretty cool. But anyway. Oh, the one that was compiling shaders just now. Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at things. We actually did get to 1840 last week, which I'm surprised. I recall us getting almost nowhere, which is interesting. I've got the states pinned that we're going to be developing. So again, if Britain presumably is not going to invade us, there's always the chance other countries will. I've seen plenty of games where even just without event chains, European powers still invade and take treaty ports from the Qing. So it's not like it's over and done with, right? And we're all fine and we just get to like develop on our own. We still have to worry about the Europeans. But since we're doing like, the semblance of a bit of realism and roleplay, not real roleplay, but a tiny bit, I'm going to kind of go with a continuation of the Chanzia kind of mindset where we don't really realize in how much danger we're actually in, right? So I think a degree of overconfidence and the beginnings of, Western function and Chinese essence is beginning right now. So attempting essentially to import technologies, modes of production, and Western approaches to science while retaining, core Chinese Confucian kind of essence, I should say, not essentialism, essence. Which just basically means we're going to be trying to, industrialize, get new technologies while doing almost no governmental reforms, which, is always a recipe for real success, right? Biggest company in the world was at IKEA. Funnily enough, it was I think a timber company. I got a bunch of colonies in Sweden, and then I forced a bunch of countries to take deals where they gave monopoly rights to my logging company that I also gave tooling rights. So they basically had monopoly over almost all forestry and tooling buildings in a huge chunk of the world's economy. It was pretty disgusting. And very similar to IKEA in some ways. So, kind of. What's up, Gavin? How you doing? Yeah, it was a fun game. All right, so we are the Daoguang Emperor, 1830. He's pretty run-of-the-mill, if I remember correctly. He didn't push any major reform movements or anything like that, or very, very much kind of after the golden age of the Qing here. But as I said, given that Britain hasn't invaded, we will not see firsthand what that looks like. We will still have the Canton system, right? We're pretty kind of ambivalent with regards to any sort of foreign policy or anything like that. So we're kind of just going to keep industrializing. The main states I'm kind of working on industrialization with here, Southern Jilin and Shaanxi are going to be kind of our industrial hubs. We're going to do a lot of iron and coal in both those places. Our breadbasket will be Chongqing and Xi'an, and then our obviously trade hub and like general naval hubs are going to be Guangdong down there by where all the trade's happening. I forget the name of that bay or estuary. And then in Shandong. So we're just going to keep up with that. Mainly working on iron right now, right? Like any larger country at the start of not U4. What am I talking about? Victoria 3. Our main issue is just kind of like basic goods, right? And primarily that is going to be iron. Yes, minus 800. We have big wood issues. A lot of general problems with like commodities. But we have a giant base economy. So it's not too bad. So I'm going to not do speed 4. That's a bad idea. Do any of your mods add new states? I don't believe so. I don't think so. Because I don't have VFM on. I better politics and a couple other mods like that. But I don't think anything changes states. There's a lot of changes to like the political kind of elements and some other stuff. But not states. Alright, we've got the banners all set up as well. For a war that turns out probably won't be happening. I'm curious if we still do get something. The question is not if the Europeans are going to intervene, but how long and in what way they're going to do so, right? So, let's switch up the music a little bit too. I like the Three Kingdoms playlist because it's really chill, but sometimes it's a little too, you know, dramatic. Play a classic instead. How's everybody's week been? I have spent the last week through the New Year's. I'm now 29 years old. It feels very weird. I'm almost fucking 30. I had my birthday on New Year's Day. And, you know, it's interesting. After 25, every birthday for me is kind of just like not wanting to think about it. Aging is real. But it was nice. I spent most of my week reading. I found a really interesting writer who I've been reading a lot of lately. There's two books I said I was going to read over winter break kind of intensely, and I found kind of a new writer I've been reading a lot of. The two books were I was going to reread Incomplete Nature by Terence Deacon, and I was going to read Autopoiesis by Maturana and Varela, which I've read parts of, but I never read the whole thing. But towards the end of last semester, I came across a guy named Nicholas Luhmann. Has anyone ever heard of him? There was a snowstorm for a number of days here. It's been cold. We had a lot of snow the last few weeks as well. It's definitely deep winter. Basically completely shut down public transport where I live. Nero, are you in the northern part of Sweden or are you more in the central parts? Because I know there's like the northern part of Scandinavia get really bad, but I didn't think the south did as much by the Baltic. But I also don't know very well. Can you do a new mega grand campaign? Yeah, so I'm going to be continuing the second grand campaign with House and the playthrough we were doing, like in Britain, but I'm waiting right now for the Fallen Eagle mod to update. I've got the mod list ready to go. Everything's ready. I'm just waiting for Fallen Eagle to update. There's no current timeline on the mod update, but I'm hoping it's within a couple weeks or a month or so, but we'll see. It was my mom's birthday on the 2nd, so I spent the day hanging out with her and some family. Nice, that's chill. Family time over the holidays is lovely, as long as you don't get too much of it. All right, we're just really waiting for things. I did all the decrees, right? I did, yeah. We have a real problem with bureaucracy. Is that because I'm establishing a... No, we just need more government bureaucracy. Okay. 700. They are 50 each. We need around 15. We'll build them all in Beijing, of course. Unless there's a lot of places where our taxation capacity isn't high enough. But given it's not in Beijing either, I think we just keep building there. Yeah, we'll do that. 15 more. We'll do that after the iron. Because that is where the majority of our deficit, I believe, is coming from right now. It's just our bureaucratic deficit. Couldn't take the bus to my workplace for my workdays on the Friday, and even getting through my car was less than easy. Thankfully, it's basically over now, and tomorrow it seems like love will be, it's not as horrible. Yeah, getting around when it's cold is awful. Even if you have like good boots and stuff, getting around in the cold is not fun. Winters here in Ohio they're not the worst, but there's usually a lot of ice and stuff like that, and public transport's not too bad, but if you gotta walk around and stuff like that, that's brutal. I don't know about y'all, but whenever I see ice on the road and I feel ice underneath my feet, I'm always just like, okay, we're gonna walk like 50% slower right now. I've fallen too many times on ice. It is awful. Winter's lovely. It's really pretty when there's snow out and you're sitting indoors, you know, with heating. It's like, oh, this is really nice. And then as soon as you need to actually go out into it, winter stops being as nice. I have very mixed feelings on it. Happy New Year to you too. The year of the horse, is it really? Huh. Back to what I was talking about. There's a guy I found named Nicholas Luhmann, who I've been reading a lot of kind of like some of his papers, and then I've started reading one of his main books, Introduction to Systems Theory by Nicholas Luhmann. It's really good. And which is kind of a conglomeration of like a lot of his writings and some of his lectures. It's really good. I've been reading that. And then his, what's it called? Theory of Social Systems. I've been reading that book too. It's really interesting. He's a sociologist / systems theorist. And a lot of his writing has to kind of do with like how systems function, how to kind of like identify systems in and of themselves. He deals a lot with like, kind of like how to differentiate like a system or any other sort of classification from like the environment itself. It's really been good. I'd heard of him before long ago, and I kind of found him again because I've been working on like a personal Zettelkasten, which is like a knowledge system, information system. But reading his books have been fantastic. So the last week has been basically just reading intensely, but it's been fun. That's the nice thing about like break before school starts in the winter, at least for me. Last year, last winter, I was horribly sick, awfully sick. But this time around, I actually get to spend time on some like, you know, just casual reading where I'm not inundated with schoolwork, which is very good. Have you ever tried the penguin walk? I know I have, especially when there's a ton of ice. You mean like this slow kind of like sideways waddle where you like brace yourself? Yeah, I've done that a good few times. Always wise. All right, we're not going to do any political reforms. I'm going to keep it on speed 2 because I don't want to rush too much here. We probably need to promote some generals and stuff like that, but I'm not going to do it until we get our bureaucracy in line because generals do cost bureaucracy. When you have a deficit of bureaucracy, not only does it just reduce your tax income, but it reduces the efficiency, I think, of your tax too. I know it does it in 2 different ways, so always make sure your bureaucracy is in a surplus. Despite still being in a deficit, we are running a surplus. Do I want to take down taxes, or do I want to just increase construction sectors? Where is it coming from? A lot of it's coming from temporary national revenue because our investment pool is actually at 19 million. That's a lot. If I increase our construction more, the danger is we might get into a deficit on our investment pool, and we want that to keep building up. So probably increase it a bit more and then reduce taxes, I think. I'll give it a minute though. Doesn't hurt to build a few more. So iron is our #1 priority, then coal, then tools, and then probably steel. Our general approach to Europeans right now would be one of kind of general disinterest from like the central level in Beijing. But like individual regions did a lot more explicit like cooperation, but it was mainly with European merchants. So I guess I'll probably let the AI do things. This is where I do miss like the old multiplayer games we used to do in Victoria 3. Out of every single Paradox game I played, like extensive multiplayer campaigns of, Victoria 3 was almost my favorite. Because I think this game is really perfect for it in many ways. Being able to adapt to other players' behavior and stuff like that. Like you could do it with an AI and like single player, right? But it's always a lot less interesting than other players because they'll just do things you don't expect. Until, of course, we get, you know, language model based AI behavior and strategy games, which I don't think will be for a while. One moment. Okay. We're not going to get companies for quite a while. I don't want to kind of pre-plan things. It's interesting. Kind of in the like middle 19th century, I'm trying to think, China had like one really big company it actually did kind of, I wouldn't say built, because it like, if anything, the central like Qing dynasty interfered and caused more problems than benefit. But it had a really big shipping company. What was the name of it? Like the Piang Shipping Company, Qing China. It was really, it got very, very wealthy for quite a while. What was the name of it? Hold on. I'm gonna have to pull something really quickly. I'm trying to remember, because I think our first company I might do for that. Then again, shipping isn't like the most profitable thing in general. If we end up not being isolationist in our policy, though, it could be quite useful. Because we're stuck in the Canton system right now, which I'm not going to get rid of for probably quite a while. Authority, maximum tariffs, maximum imports. But if we do switch to mercantilism for a while. What was the name of that company? I'm trying to remember. 1 second. It's really interesting. Why can I not find it? Here we go. Chinese Merchants Navigation Company. It's super interesting. Are they still around? Holy fuck, they're still around? I didn't know that. That's crazy. Let's see if my stream up. I think I can stream this. I can, yeah. Yeah, so I guess they're called the China Merchants Group now. They're still around, which is crazy. China's Merchant Steam Navigation Company was a shipping company founded in 1872 by the Viceroy Zi Li Hongzhang. I talked about him last time. He's a fascinating guy. He's also the guy that basically more or less created the Peiying Navy, which was like China's staple fleet that got absolutely wrecked by the Japanese fleet. Was currently serving as the commissioner of the Beijing fleet. Its purpose was to capture part of international trade, which had been virtually monopolized by foreign companies based on the treaty ports. 80% of the company's startup capital is provided by native Chinese, making it the first transportation company using modern technology not based on foreign ownership. Which doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's a very big deal. It obtained government support and received a monopoly contract to transport the tribute grain from the Yangtze Valley to the capital in Beijing. The company also received loans from government sources and monopoly rights to prevent the founding rival Chinese steamship companies. It's really interesting. They got a little bit into international shipping for a while as well. I can't believe they're still around. But what ended up happening, right, is obviously with the Canton system and later with, like, you know, generally the treaty ports and the enormous amount of kind of trade happening with China, is that all of the shipping was basically done by Europeans or by like Westerners of various sorts. Like the Americans got in on it too and things like that. But it's really fascinating because if you look at the modern world of shipping, which I've always kind of had a bit of a fascination with, I used to trade stocks when I was younger. In my teens, 1 second. I'm going to read this first. Lin Zexu, leader of the ruling scholar officials, has had enough of compromising with his coalition partners. He has demanded that either his collaborators follow his orders, the scholar officials will never approve of their changes. This is based on the guy who started the first Opium War when he confiscated all the opium. I guess he's in charge of the scholar officials now. That's quite funny. We're going to give him support. He's a very interesting guy. Politicized accounts of discrimination against Confucian people in Russia have led to Confucian scholars to align themselves with the anti-Russian association. Fine by me. China did not like Russia in this time period at all, for good reason. Anyway, I used to trade stocks a lot when I was younger, in my teens, especially in my early 20s. I did pretty well overall, especially with cryptocurrencies later, but that was a lot more risky. But I traded a lot of Chinese shipping companies back in the day, because Chinese markets were a lot more lucrative. You had a lot more upside. They were complicated because you obviously had to consider a lot of things. But I always had a fascination with shipping. The probably 3 most profitable stock trades I've made in my life were all shipping companies. There were 2 Chinese companies I made quite a lot of money on when I was younger. And then there was a Greek shipping company I made a stupid amount of money on in my early 20s. What was it called? CTRM, I think. Yeah. Yeah, Castor Maritime. These guys. I made so much money on them. Jesus Christ, it was crazy. They're a little sketchy. If you do any sort of stock trading, always research the company you're buying into, unless you're, you know, a day trader. In which case, the brain rot will not help with anything. But generally, I've always had an interest in shipping. It's very profitable if you understand kind of how it functions, right? What's fascinating is in this time period in the 19th century and kind of in the history of the world, shipping was primarily a European industry for the most part, and then America kind of got into the game and stuff like that. But kind of with the rise of European industrialization, the colonial era, the imperial era, like the early modern era, it was European shipping that absolutely dominated, whether that was direct capital ownership, but usually also like even production, right? When you think about Britain in its heyday, right? The Newcastle shipyards produced an enormous amount of, like, you know, the biggest per tonnage freight ships in the world and things like that. Europe was like the kind of shipping hub. But if you look in the modern context, it's all Asia, right? There's 3 kind of hyper important countries in terms of manufacturing shipping, and there's really only one in terms of dominance in terms of which country really owns like shipping companies. China overall, right? Japan and Korea still produce a good amount of like actual vessels and stuff like that, but their actual shipping companies are very much secondary to China. So it's been always fascinating to me to kind of see like that transfer of kind of like logistics and transport and shipping from Europe to Asia, and specifically to China too. And the reason I brought up that one kind of company, which again I can't believe is still around, China's Merchants Group, is that was their attempt to basically kind of capture a portion of the shipping market share that was dominated by the Europeans and the Canton system and then the treaty port system, where anything going out of China was going to be in a European or, you know, American controlled vessel and company, right? But nowadays, You know, it completely switched around. Like the Chinese shipping company more or less failed, primarily because the central government tried to treat it as a cash cow and to invest in it long term. Apparently it did survive and is still around nowadays, but it resulted in them failing to kind of basically compete or capture a portion of the market share there. But then obviously after kind of, you know, World War II, Bretton Woods, the transition under Deng, and then, you know, later obviously reformers into the modern China that we see nowadays, they've completely 180'd. I mean, now they are the shipping company that dominates. I mean, there are regional ones and stuff like that, right? Like there are European ones. I talked about CTR and they're Greek and stuff like that. But if you look at like Evergreen and the really big shipping conglomerates, I mean, the not quite monopolies, but the dominant ones, they're all Chinese. America's shipping, I think we have like one company, it's still kind of starts with an M, Marxim or something like that, Maxim. We have like one shipping company that's still relevant. There's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of it's legal. I'm not even going to start ranting on that, but it's funny how that 180s, huh? Did they like anyone at this point in history? They loved Korea, which was part of China, more or less. Qing China really liked Korea, which was a vassal state. And I mean, Joseon Korea really internalized Confucian values and the Tianxia model. We like Korea quite a lot. Beyond that, not much else. Hamu, how are you? Beautiful wee bastard. What's up, Scythe? How you doing? Less beautiful these days, but whatevers. What does that mean? Deeply insulted. Hope you're doing well, man. I know a lot about the American Revolution, but not the Industrial Age. It's really worth learning about. It's a bit less fun. I mean, if you play paradox games and strategy games in general, and you read history, I mean, like wars and stuff like that are very flashy. But if you want to look into like the real meat of like, you know, of kind of change in the underlying processes, you got to kind of look at like obviously the Industrial Revolution, but just kind of the economic substrata in general, right? Maersk, is that the one? We've got one left. There's one kind of holding out. Maersk Shipping. What's that? No, I don't think so. U.S. Shipping Company. A lot of it got bought out too. I know they're like still barely holding on. U.S. Maritime Shipping Company. Let's see if I can find it. We do have a lot, but in terms of like market share, like large companies, they're still around, right? Matson's the one I'm thinking of. These guys. Matson Shipping. Are they publicly traded? I assume they are. Yeah, they are. Maddox. 3.86 billion market cap. So pretty big, but you compare that to something like... Is Evergreen publicly traded? I think it is. Yeah, right. I think that's the right one. Yeah, so, I mean, this is, I believe, our largest market cap shipping company left in the US. I think it's Matson. 3.86 billion market cap. Evergreen, for example, 417 billion. So, I mean, a lot of it is because, I mean, Asia in general is able to undercut in a lot of different areas, and shipping's no different. But a lot of it's also like US legality and stuff like that. At the modern day mod in Hoi 4, please can you tell me how to even survive? No, I haven't played in quite a while. I don't really do tutorials for it. You can watch my old videos if that helps you, Megor. But in general, I don't play it enough to give you probably very good advice. And even if I did, I am streaming Vic 3. But watch the tutorial videos and then join their Discord and ask on there. That'll probably help you a good bit. It's tough though. You know anything about Lanfeng, Republic, or the Ever Kongzi? They were like guild confederations that operated a bit like Qing colonial companies. Langfang should be present in Borneo. It is. Yeah, right there. Lanfeng. My understanding, Anrak, is that Lanfeng and those other sorts of kind of like Southeast Asian, like Chinese related advancements, weren't they more kind of like cultural as well? Not like expelling people per se, but they were almost like cultural colonies with economic elements. I don't understand them very well, to be quite honest with you. Let me look it up. Which I really should, because they're super interesting. Because didn't Singapore come out of one of those as well? There we go. Pause the game for a second. Kongsi republics or Kongsi democracies. Self-governing political entities in Borneo that formed as federations of Chinese mining communities known as Kongsis. By the mid-19th century, the Kongsi republics controlled most of western Borneo. The three largest Kongsi republics were the Lanfang Republic, the Hishon Confederacy, and the Santiago Federation? After it split from the Hishun. Are they in the game right now? Let's see. Dutch. Yeah, probably in Borneo and places like that. Commercial Kongsis were common in the Chinese diasporic communities. Yeah, that's what I thought. Throughout the world, but the Kongsi republics of Borneo were unique in that they were sovereign states that controlled large swaths of territory. This characteristic distinguishes them from the sultanates of Southeast Asia, which held authority over their subjects yet did not control the territory where the subject resided. The Kongsi republics competed with the Dutch over the control of Borneo, culminating in the Kongsi Wars. The Dutch eventually defeated the republics, bringing their territory under the control of the Dutch colonial state. A lot, obviously, given the fact that China had been not quite, I'd say, neutered or become, you know, kind of militarily or diplomatically impotent per se from like the tributary wars and the treaty port wars and things like that. But China naturally was not very interventionist in general in Asia, so it's kind of expected, to be honest. Lingfeng exists in the game. It's the purple country in Borneo. Yes, indeed. Because does anyone know? Didn't Singapore kind of like relate to one of the? It wasn't a Kongsi per se, but I know it came out of like the diaspora communities. Direct democracy were called republics. I'm gonna read a little bit about this because this is interesting. I actually don't know too much about this. Kongsis were originally commercial organizations consisting of members that provided capital and shared profits. They were first established in the late 18th century as the Chinese immigrated to Southeast Asia. So that would have been underneath like the Qing Emperor probably in like the Golden Age. So I know he was pretty expansionistic. He fought a lot of like periphery wars in mainland China too against like the steppe and stuff like that. And I think he did a little bit of conflict even in Vietnam. I can't remember though. The majority of Kongsis began on a modest scale as partnership systems called huais, unions. These partnership systems were important economic institutions that existed in China since the emergence of the Song dynasty. They were, I believe, heavily based on familiar ties as well, right? A lot of it related to kind of like dynastic ties, I think. A hui became known as a Kongsi once it expanded into a sizable institution that comprised members numbering the hundreds of thousands. There are scant records of the first Chinese mining communities. Gold mines had been established in 79. Competition between Kongsis increased as old mining sites were exhausted and miners expanded new territories. Huh. Sometimes I'm amused about the fact that I was born too late to experience an opium den firsthand. I don't know about that, man. I think there's a good number of places in the world you can still find a fairly authentic opium den, you know? Maybe you won't kind of have the ambiance of the Opium Wars kind of coinciding with your experience, but I'd say there's a good number of places in like the Istans and Central Asia, in like northeast Iran, parts of Afghanistan, parts of China. I think you could find some pretty horrific places that would give you the full experience. I don't know why you'd want that, but they're probably out there. You know, when I play Vicky 3, I just want to play a dictator. Yes, the appeal of fascism and tyranny is strong in these games. Dictatorships in Victoria 3 in the beginning are very easy and normative, but if you try and hold on to authoritarian powers in Vic 3, like really past, I'd say 1870, 1880, it's a real challenge, that's for sure. You wanted to visit Central Asia, but I don't think it's worth it. I would really not advise it. Okay. So a little bit more about this Chinese term for company, Hokkien. Yeah, social organizations or partnerships, but the term was used for various Chinese institutions. Prior to like the modern context, China had a very complicated relationship with like mercantile practices and like any form of like extractive commerce, because like Confucian values, the Confucian texts written by Confucius, like they do a fair amount of equating of like explicit monetary, like prosperity is good, like building prosperity and things like that, and wealth in certain contexts are good, but explicitly like extractive forms of what we probably nowadays think about, like corporations or general like commerce and things like that, those are kind of immoral. It's very strange. I don't fully understand it quite myself, but I know that there's some real nuance there. Huh. I'll have to read more of them though. Anrak, have you read much on them? Do you know much about them? I remember, I think you played Lanfeng in one of our games before, right? And I'm sure you did a bunch of research on them. I remember something about the Ming not engaging in trade officially and was framed as reciprocal tribute and gift exchanges. Yeah, not just the Ming, the Qing did that as well. And I think most of the dynasties did to various degrees. One second, I'm gonna read this. Once again, the time has come for imperial examinations. These have been used for centuries across multiple dynasties as a theoretically meritocratic way to select and provide the vast amount of bureaucrats required all across the Great Qing. Alrighty. Be cool if they generated like new interesting characters or something. We're to keep working on logging, where we've gotten rid of most of our bureaucratic deficit as well. I will do the last two on that as well, just so we're barely in a surplus there. Qualification program. We have innovation in Beijing. We just kind of got to wait on that. And then, generally speaking, there's not much else really to be done right now. We had a giant deficit of logs, which are obviously used for construction in this time period. Not quite too bad. Iron, again, is our major problem. And tools, of course. We don't have steel yet, and I don't think we have the tech for steel, so... It's just going to be us building logging camps and iron mines for quite a while. I'll build some more of those. Not those, though. I've never seen a great class for the Imperial examinations. Even in the game, or are you roasting the examination system in general? Didn't they ban like most foreign visitors unless they were ambassadors? Yeah, you could not be basically outside of the indicated regions, which was like right here. There were little parts of like the bay here near Guangzhou where foreigners were allowed. Anywhere else, strictly banned. You get arrested for it, imprisoned, sometimes killed. You also couldn't even learn Chinese. It was illegal to learn Chinese for foreigners. They had to use interpreters. We'll get rid of the Mahayana rights movement. That's a Buddhist movement, essentially, which we don't really want to deal with. Usually Buddhist movements result in turban rebels of various sorts in China, so we're very cautious of them. The Chinese people demand meat. Yeah, our food deficits are... They're not the worst, though. We have giant surpluses of grains, things like rice, which is all that really matters, but our basic services aren't fantastic, and we will be foregoing further field and clothing development in order to just build more iron mines, which, you know, is the key of industrialization. I know about as much as you do, but you're right that the people from Lanfeng were a big factor in the founding of Singapore. Yeah, I do remember that. Hey man, your Hoi 4 videos are really helping me understand the game. I appreciate you making those. You're very welcome. I'm glad that they're still helpful. I know some of them are a little outdated nowadays, but the core parts of a good few of them I think will always be pretty relevant, so I'm glad they helped. It's crazy about the ramifications of this, among others, is that to this day, most Westerners are most familiar with Cantonese culture than they are with Chinese culture. There's a lot of misunderstanding too, because I think a lot of people equate Cantonese culture with Han culture, which is a problem. But there's a general misunderstanding of like cultural differences in China, probably exacerbated by the attempted homogenization of China itself, of its kind of like innate cultures, right? Like the Han influence is fairly dominant nowadays in China. And as we, I think, have found out very clearly with northwestern China, they don't tolerate a lot of cultural disparities these days. What's up, Degenerate? How are you doing, man? Yeah, I like, there was a lot of, it was interesting because like someone earlier said like where direct trade didn't happen and it was kind of a tributary system. Yeah, the way that happened was that China basically built like a cultural, political, economic, and trade kind of apparatus. It's called like, you know, the, what's it called? Not hierarchy system, but I'm completely forgetting right now. Someone literally just named it too. I was just referred to it as like Tanzia, the mandate of heaven, tributary model, right? That's the other way of putting it. Wherein basically there would be kind of like the political and diplomatic element where like other countries and traders would come to China and they'd frame trade as basically gift giving, right? At least at the macro level. Like individually between like merchants in like coastal cities or towns and stuff like that, trade was kind of a lot more, I think, honest about what it was, but the framing was within like the concept of the tributary system. And part of that I think did relate to like the Confucian culture and its complicated relationship with notions like trade or profit or things like that. But the other element was it also operated kind of, almost not symbiotically per se, but it allowed China to basically try to think of how to phrase it. It's not weaponization. That's not the word. It allowed China to, I'll say utilize its innate strengths. China's innate power from day one has not been pure autarky. Like it's not completely self-sufficient. Like we see in this game, there's always good deficits and things like that. And there's things that they do want to trade. But China, kind of like the modern US, has had, for all its history, a kind of enormous domestic market. I mean, even China, while it was small or even while it was split, the amount of like people and consumers in economic terms in China is fucking enormous, right? It's gigantic. We're seeing it now, especially in the modern days. But China utilized that with its kind of like the tributary system. It basically forced countries to kind of enter into its kind of like diplomatic cultural sphere by not kind of holding its own domestic market hostage per se. It was like a bargaining chip, and that like not only like to get access to trade with us, not only do you kind of have to pay lip service, but you kind of explicitly have to accept that you're within our like cultural and economic sphere, as opposed to just purely kind of like bilateral trade between like equals, right? The modern Westphalian model of nation states kind of acting, at least theoretically, as equals didn't exist in kind of Asia historically, and especially in China. Trade for them what was kind of framed through tribute and gifts, because not only was that kind of just how the understanding of it operated, at least between like countries as we understand it, but it was also like a tool that developed over time. It's really interesting. I think there's a lot of reductionism that happens with the tributary system and like China's historical kind of approach to trade and things like it. It's complicated though. I barely understand it half the time. It's very, the issue is because like when you deal with like historical cultures and contexts that just have like a different baseline ontology than you, like their understanding of the world, their assumptions, the words that you kind of learn about them through don't mean the same things. It's very difficult to understand. Like that's why a lot of people misunderstand other countries, but especially China, is because a lot of their historical kind of just baseline is so radically different. I don't want to say alien because that has a lot of negative connotations, but it's just so radically different that misunderstanding is natural, I think. But a lot of people take shortcuts with it. It's really interesting though. The Brits apparently just didn't do the opium stuff. They didn't, no, not at all. What would happen if I say you would immediately get banned? Immediately. As a chef, I always had to chuckle when people talk about Chinese cuisine. When there are really many Chinese cuisines, they're often or even more distinct from those of other countries. Yeah, I mean, that's like saying European food. I've heard that before. Which is a little bit different because they're different countries, right? But yeah, no, China's got so many different distinct kind of regionals and cultures and like subcultures and stuff. It's fascinating. Depends what the word is. Yeah. All right. Let me take a look at the game here for a moment as well. We're not going to be getting any new techs anytime soon. We'll get delayed. The mechanical tools are still 5 years out, which is quite a while. I don't want to do a lot of diplomacy with other countries too, because I want to be a little bit realistic with this. Ottomans in Egypt are fighting. If Britain's not focusing on dunking on us, then what the fuck are they doing? Apparently political turmoil is their current focus. They're in the Egyptian-Ottoman war as well. They're supporting the Ottomans naturally. It's not surprising. Alright, I guess you're just focusing on Levant then. That's fine. What about the French? I'm gonna keep an eye on the big powers we have to worry about here. And the Russians. Holy Alliance still very much in effect. Got the Quadruple Alliance. Probably America. Actively belligerent. I want to improve relations, but we wouldn't do that, so we'll just ignore them. And then the Dutch. Qing Manchu, not even Chinese. Yeah, I mean, like, give it, well. Are the Manchu not technically Chinese? I suppose not. It's very weird. Because, like, despite... I mean, originally they were like a kind of more steppe tribes, right? Ethnically and culturally, they're definitely not kind of like central Chinese. But the Manchu also did rule over China for like 200 years. Then you get into a real, I think, kind of ship of Theseus situation with cultures, don't you? Are they still not Chinese when they, you know, integrated in... I wouldn't say integrated, but they were kind of so directly involved with them. China, as like a general concept, has subsumed and sublimated so many different cultures. That gets really iffy. But I would agree innately that they're not Chinese. I don't know. It always amuses me that people get offended by words. I don't know. There's some words I just don't want to hear or listen to. I think everyone has the right to say what they want. I think you should be able to say horrible things. But I also think that, you know, anyone has the given right to also not want to listen to them. There's a lot of words for me that are just... I don't think pathetic's the right word, but they're just kind of... They suggest a lot of things about the person saying them that makes me very wary, you know? Language tells you a lot about a person. Not just in terms of, like, you know, the dramatics of it, right? Like, you know, when you use certain, like, slurs or things like that. But any way someone speaks tells you a lot about them. We constantly do that, right? When you listen to someone, their word choice, the manner they approach language, how they talk about things, that's kind of like the way to understand their identity and character, broadly speaking. So I for one, am always very, very mindful and pay a lot of attention to how people speak, the words they use, and kind of how they use words. And there are some words that I don't view it innately and immediately as like a total kind of character flaw, but they definitely send off a lot of warning signals very loudly. It's been a minute since I streamed or uploaded. It's been quite a while. I'm back in college right now. I'm on winter break, but I'm back in school, so most of my time has been there nowadays. What's up, Julio? How are you? So how are we going to save China from the brother of Jesus? I don't know if we will. We might lose the civil war. The Taiping Rebellion is fucking brutal. We might not win it. In the Sweden game, I kind of played a bit in like solo this week as Sweden. He won. Like the Taiping Rebellion won. It was really interesting. So I don't know if we're gonna win it or not. We might not. Han migration to the frontier. For centuries, Han farmers have chosen to leave their home provinces to make a bid for land and opportunity in the frontier territories. So we were talking about with the Kongzi and stuff like that in Borneo and Southeast Asia. While often discouraged by Qing authorities, it is often hard to manage these vast internal borders. It's a lot of people. A lot of them are skilled laborers too. I don't care if laborers or peasants leave, but I'm very concerned if we lose clerks. Where the fuck even is that? No, it's still within China, I think, so that's not too bad. It's kind of more internal migration than anything else. I always thought that Qing were completely sinicized. They more or less over time, like the ruling Manchu dynasty of the Qing very much became sinicized, probably almost entirely, I would say. Like they maintain certain parts of like their Manchu kind of like tradition and stuff like that, but by the time we're looking at things in 1841, it's very much a sinicized like dynasty, right? Heavily. I don't think words are horrible, they're all the same. Fully disagreed. Boat homework, 2 words, but they have different meanings. Maduro's a word. Yeah, it is. How about Venezuela, ladies and gentlemen? Y'all, I'm sure all of you have been following that. Fucking crazy. I have such mixed emotions about that whole thing. I'm so conflicted. The Qing banned Hans from moving to Manchu territory. Yeah, a lot of like the region of historical Manchuria, like where the Manchu like dynasty came from, was kind of like sanctioned off and kind of like, I don't want to say preserved per se, like a preserve, because that has a lot of negative connotations, but like they tried to maintain the independence of the historical Manchu people and culture and stuff like that. The ruling dynasty did, despite them becoming fully sinicized, which is interesting. Do you have colonialism? No. I mean, we kind of have natural migrations and stuff like Lanfang or a vassal, but we don't have explicit colonial policies. I'm going to kind of let things go where they do, like the movements and stuff like that, and wait until we get some major political changes before I start to do things. I'm not purely role-playing, but I'm also, you know, certainly not going to metagame into colonies and things like that. The Americans kidnapped the Venezuelan president and illegally double-trapped a boat. Maduro is bad, but also this is illegal, and they're just taking oil again. Yeah, I have very mixed emotions about it. I really don't know how to feel about Maduro. Like, on the one hand, Chavezism? Is it Chavezism? What's his party's name? Chavezism? Chavez. From Hugo, what's his name? Chavezism? I keep saying the word like it's gonna mean more. What's that movement called? Is it Chavezism or is it something else? Because he's the successor of Hugo Chavez, who, if we're really, 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 really generous and loose with the term, we could call a socialist movement. Got to play really fast and loose with ideology there, but yeah, on the one hand, like I'm really glad he's gone in some ways. Like him and Hugo Chavez, they were very corrupt, right? It's a very, very, very corrupt party system, and they've been, you know, pretty dictatorial. It's not quite as simple as like pure authoritarians, but they're not far off. So I'm glad that he's gone, but I'm worried about kind of what's going to come after now in Venezuela. My biggest concern out of that whole operation, though, is what it's going to like kind of normalize again, right? Because my immediate thought as soon as I woke up and saw the headline about Maduro being taken by America, my immediate thought was like, oh fuck, Taiwan. I didn't even think about like Maduro and Venezuela. My immediate thought was like, fucking Taiwan. This is gonna be interesting because like this is gonna ripple, right? When you kind of break international norms, like the international structure, we don't have a global government. We don't have, you know, any authority in the world that can kind of like dictate. The UN is not a joke, but it's not far off. But there's certainly a degree of international norms in terms of like what political actions and economic actions are normal, acceptable versus costly. And actions like this kind of, you know, obviously compounding on something like the Ukraine war, which is like the first modern war in Europe in the first time a major power has kind of fought a really large land war in a long time. The Maduro situation kind of compounds that, because it's not a direct war, right? But it's America directly interfering in, you know, all of our American states, and it's a breach of kind of like the innate sovereignty that's supposed to exist in the Westphalian system, right? Like you're not supposed to just kidnap a leader of another country and pretend he's not legitimate. Legitimacy is a very shaky thing, right? And it gets really abstract really quickly. But when you kind of set the norm that yes, you can just go in here and kidnap a leader, doesn't matter how awful he is, you're setting a norm. It's really, I think, compounding and resulting in a continuation of the breakdown and like the norms that have kind of been established in the 20th century in kind of like the post-American hegemonic world order, if we're really generous with hegemony. So that's my big worry of all this. I'm glad he's gone, but goddamn, it's gonna ripple pretty hard. It's setting up nothing but bad global precedent and very reminiscent of Iraq. Depends. We haven't put troops on the ground yet, and I'm glad that Trump's not doing that. That's good, at least for now. But he said at least he plans to try and actively intervene in Venezuelan, you know, political sovereignty, which is worrying. But who gave the authority to the U.S. to violate a sovereign country? I mean, none. Don't get me wrong. I want to be very clear here. I'm not. The problem with the situation is that, like, I think it's going to be portrayed one of two ways. And ideology has a lot to do with that, because in the modern world, especially in America, a lot of things just get boiled down to the left versus the right, which is problematic for so many reasons. But I think it is going to get portrayed one of two ways. It already is, right? You're going to have one side, which will be like, you know, your liberal New York Times columnists, your Al Jazeera's, your, you know, kind of critical, any sort of critical political economic theorists, who are going to kind of take this down the route of, this is unacceptable. Why is the UN not doing anything? This is modern imperialism, modern colonialism. It's extractive. It's about resources. You know, it's about class issues, and all those things may be true to certain degrees, but it's kind of going to be put like into that box. Or it'll be the other side of things, which is that, you know, this is realpolitik. It's, you know, maybe not completely legitimate, but it's the ousting of someone who's dangerous, reminiscent of Iraq, reminiscent of kind of like our actions in Panama and things like that, right? And, you know, maybe it's not perfect, but someone needed to do it. It's going to be kind of framed as legitimate because the ends justify the means, and the necessity in kind of the modern world to kind of like take strong action and things like that. It's already kind of getting framed in those two different kind of lights. But my core concern with this situation, I think what will probably matter the most in terms of long-term effects, is not per se either one of those. As I said before, the long-term, I think, kind of effect and framing that you kind of need to think about with Venezuela is, I think, twofold. One, it's kind of the continuation of, how to phrase it. We're entering back into a fairly anarchistic kind of global environment. Because I'm not like a hardcore realist. I don't kind of buy into the whole concept that everything is kind of naturally anarchy and chaos, blah, 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 blah. There's always systems of order that appear, you know, it's just how that works. But in the 20th century, for better or worse, there were some pretty strong political international norms put in place by America, by the Soviet Union, by the UN. And some of it was coerced and some of it wasn't. But like, when was the last time America did something of this degree in Latin and South America? It would have been in the 60s with Panama, which I think was, I want to say Reagan, right? I think. It's been a long time since America's done something like this. You could say Iraq, right? But Iraq's very different than Venezuela, regardless of how Venezuela proceeds. In 90s under Bush, was it that late? That was the kidnapping in Panama, right? It was the 90s. Full invasion, I think the last time was 60s, though, if I remember correctly, though. Political interventionism would be with Bush Sr. in the 90s, and then active invasion would have been, I think, in the 60s. Yeah. But the problem, I think, is that when that was occurring in the 20th century under Bush Sr., right, it was a very different situation. Grenada too, right? Panama 89 was a full invasion. Okay. That was where we intervened in like the election after it didn't go our way. We ousted and extradited the leader, and then kind of forced the government in place. The difference still between that time period and now is like the environment, right? The political environment. In 1989, right? That's the fall of the Soviet Union. That's America kind of unopposed as a global power in terms of economic might, trade power, dominance of international regimes, and things like that. We could swing our dick around and like we could kind of follow through with it. And other people understood that what America did probably didn't apply to them. I don't think in quite the same way. What's so different now with Venezuela and when kind of things like this happen is we're in the beginnings of a real multipolar world, right? In the sense that America, regardless of your politics, I think almost everyone can acknowledge that they are very, very much on the heels of America. Maybe not in cutting edge technology or the scope of their military capacity, but purely in terms of like industrial and economic numbers, they're there, right? The EU, for better or worse, is kind of in the middle of deciding if it wants to kind of go down the path of federalization. But generally speaking, European states operate with a degree of economic cohesion and consensus, more or less. The point being, it's multipolar in the sense that there are other powerful political actors that can watch kind of the changes in like these sorts of norms and what's allowed, and they're going to change their behavior as a result. So I think Venezuela kind of compounds what happened in Ukraine in terms of like the decline and the degrading of kind of like, there was never real respect for national sovereignty between states, but there were some norms that kind of gave them, it's not protection, but there was kind of like a consensus on norms, and I think those are beginning to disappear more and more. And that's why, like I said, my first thought was Taiwan, because I think Venezuela really opens the door for China to kind of get more aggressive there, and they have a little bit more legitimacy when it comes to something like that, in my opinion. So I think it's dangerous, not because I don't think in the end we're going to really kind of do a direct invasion of Venezuela. I think if anything, this whole situation, a lot of it stems from the Epstein files and Trump generally trying to use something like this for kind of his economic priorities, which are like very extractive, right? But also to try and basically get his approval ratings up. Trump is very much, for better or worse, the type of leader who wants to be liked very deeply. It's not innately a flaw. Most people want to be liked, but for him, it's very much a big need. But I think like the long-term situation in Venezuela will be messy, but the real ramifications are going to be in terms of what other states will kind of view this as allowing them to do in turn, if that makes sense. Venezuela, oof. Maduro's really bad, and Portuguese reformer government during Chavez with some shady deals. Yeah, Venezuela's really bad. I'm glad Maduro's gone. I'm glad Chavez is gone, and that movement, I'm not confident about where that will go in the future. I don't think America has any sort of credentials that say they know how to state build after something like this, but maybe the best case scenario here is America's kind of very ambivalent. We did the shock and awe. We kind of allow the conditions, hopefully, for reform to happen, and maybe we get some sort of stabilization out of that. I don't think Trump or America has to follow through really for that. Like we're there primarily for extractive economic reasons, but the bigger consequences, I think, relate more to the kind of shift in international norms that's going to come out of this. That's my take, though. Venezuelans are celebrating in the streets by the thousands. Some are. Some are very happy for very good reasons. Some are very not. There's always two sides. I mean, the Chavez movement did have a pretty big support base. Not total, but they had a lot of supporters. I mean, like, that movement at its core was, in theory, socialistic in terms of kind of like redistribution of wealth. Did they do that in reality? Minimally. It was very corrupt. But, never let yourself be fooled into that concept that, like, Maduro and Chavez had no supporters and they're propped up by the military. That's not the case. They did have a large support base. for better or worse, right? Doesn't make them legitimate or justified, or their actions legitimate or justified. But I see a lot of framing attempts right now being like, oh, they had no support, everyone's happy in Venezuela. No, there's a lot of people there who did support that regime despite its corruption. For better and probably worse. Syria celebrated when Assad got deposed, but things haven't improved much since then. Yeah, Syria is such a fucking mess. One political commentator I listened to is speaking about how the invasion of Ukraine followed up by Gaza, and now this was thrown off any facade of anyone cares about international laws and norms. No one really did to begin with. International law, like UN law, is kind of a joke, right? It's like a fence you can step over at any time. Norms are more powerful than international law. International law is not that powerful. International norms are much more powerful. It's soft power, but it's much more real. It has a lot more like actual like causal propagation in behavior of like states and leaders. That's the real danger. A lot of people are beginning to talk about that too, I think. Are there any precedents in history where one country captured another leader improved stability? That's an interesting question. Huh. I got actually a hot take kind of one. Japan? If we count the emperor as basically being captured, right? The reconstruction underneath MacArthur and the transition to the post-war Japanese government, that's an example. If we're very, if we stretch your question a little bit, I'd say Japan's a example of that. Pol Pot by Vietnam, getting rid of Pol Pot, that's true. That's a never good example. I'm sure there's historical cases too. Richard the Lionheart too, if we count John's reign. You mean where Richard the Lionheart was captured in the Holy Land kind of thing? Yeah, that's true. That's pretty funny. That's funny. Napoleon? Yeah, France stabilized a lot. Europe and France stabilized after the capture of Napoleon. That's true. Triple Alliance in Paraguay. I don't know anything about that, degenerate. Richard the Lionheart was, yeah, awful. Awful, awful, awful. Yeah, yep. Greenland's a big deal. Because, I mean, Trump, like, obviously got involved with Venezuela and things like that. He's been kind of leaning heavy into Denmark for Greenland for a long time. The people there are not going to join, right? And if he does take any aggressive action with Denmark, I mean, that obviously cascades into an EU issue. Denmark's in a really weird place, as I understand it, with the European Union. Does anyone else actually don't know this? Does Denmark have, like, because they're in NATO, but does Denmark have a relationship to the EU where they're protected by like any sort of military guarantee? Yeah, it would be the end of NATO. That's given and awful for so many reasons, because NATO's pretty fucking unprecedented historically. It's so unique. That would, oh God, NATO needs to be preserved. It's not perfect, but it needs preserved. But does anyone know if Denmark has any separate treaties with the EU, like with their kind of unique relationship, where they have like military protections and guarantees? I actually don't know at all. There's a popular theory online that Trump wants to expand US borders to cover the entirety of Americas. We don't have the ability. He's not that dumb. He'll maybe talk about it, but he'll never do anything with it. Pretty much a Paraguayan dictator in the later 19th and early 20th century tried to be Napoleon for South America. Oh. What's his name? I forget. Start a war with Brazil, Bolivia, and Argentina. You gotta respect the balls. That takes some real balls, you know? Ooh, exceptional class. Very nice. What's not true? I think one statistic that came out is 8 out of every 10 males died in the war. Jesus. Denmark had a referendum last year or the year before to change their stance on EU defense. Their pro-EU defense structures now, I think, problem is that the EU is almost entirely dependent on NATO. Yeah. Yeah, very true. Does the EU... I took a whole class on the EU. I've read EU founding documents and everything, and I actually don't know. Like, what are the actual security guarantees, if any, of... I know there's been a lot of changes recently with, like, EU law and defense. Let's take a look. I have a Venezuelan friend. She's happy he is gone, but it is the power grab that's going to happen. Oil, 70% of exports, and family members are now just there. I bet there's a lot of Venezuelans. It's going to be very chaotic. Honestly, if the US and EU are at odds like this, then America having Greenland would be a security issue for Europe, so I'm sure there would be some kind of guarantee. The Trump-class battleships, they're pretty funny. I'm going to keep laughing up until any tax dollars are actually spent on their production. Then it's not funny anymore. The Common Security and Defense Policy of the European Union's EU course of action. This is the right page, right? Founded, current form, Treaty of Lisbon. Okay. Main component of EU's common foreign and security policy. CSDP involves the deployment of military civilian missions to preserve peace. I'm looking for more common defense here. Entails collective self-defense among member states as well as permanent structured cooperation. Which 26 of 27 national armed forces pursue structural integration. I know France has been pushing for military integration the last few years, which is probably wise. All right, where's this actual current? Consolidated version of the Treaty of the European Union, general provisions of the Union, provisions of common security, defense policy. I assume this is correct. It's a wiki source, which is a little iffy, but we'll use it for now. The common security and defense policy shall be an integral part of the common foreign and security policy. It shall provide the Union with an operation capacity drawn from civilian and military issues. Okay. May use them on missions outside UN general peacekeeping, in accordance with the principles of the UN Charter. Common security and defense policy shall include progressive framing of a common union defense policy. Okay. Policy of the union in accordance with this section shall not prejudice the specific characters of security and defense. Yeah, see, even talks about NATO. Certain member states and shall respect the obligations of certain member states which see their common defense realized in NATO. Do they have anything separate than NATO? They must, surely. EU security is completely reliant on NATO. We joined military training in our economic zone. We're making ships to Iceland right now, and Finland are doing the icebreakers. There's been a push since 2016 in the Russian invasion Ukraine to form their own defense policy separate of the US, formation of the EU army. I've heard so much talk about that. I know France is kind of like spearheading that, which again, I think is a very good idea. Iceland doesn't have a standing army. Yeah, and you know, it's funny because like I have so many different critiques of Donald Trump, but one thing that he has said that is fundamentally true, his approach and his conclusion based on this, I think is completely wrong. But his point that Europe did rely heavily on America militarily is completely true. There are reasons for that. They're very complicated. It's not like America doesn't get anything out of that arrangement. But I think obviously given we're well past World War II's Reconstruction, we're well past the Bretton Woods era, America does not maintain all of the economic, you know, kind of benefits it used to get, besides obviously the continued power of the dollar and some other things. I think it's very reasonable for European states to obviously reapproach their defense strategies. Getting rid of NATO is absurd, but he was not wrong about that at all. So is there nothing else about common defense, or is it just NATO? Agency to field of defense capabilities, development research, European Defense Agency. Trying to just look for anything that's actually common defense here. Here we go. If a member state is the victim of armed aggression on its territory, the other member states shall have towards it an obligation of aid and assistance by all means in their power. That's not... That wording does not mean they join, though. In accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter, this shall not prejudice the specific character of the security and defense of certain member states. Yeah, that wording, from what I see, sure as fuck doesn't sound like Article 5 of NATO. It's like an Article 5 in NATO. Not quite. I don't think. Remember correctly, the wording's different. Parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all, and consequently they agree that if such an armed attack occurs, each of them in exercise of the rights of individual or collective self-defense recognized by Article 51 of the Charter of the UN will assist the party or parties so attacking by taking forthwith individually and in concert with the other parties, such as accident deems necessary, including use of armed force. This is very explicit, right? This is attack on one is attack on all. That's the wording. This is not the same. If a member state is the victim of an armed aggression on its territory, the other member states shall have towards it an obligation of aid and assistance in their power in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter. Those are not the same thing by any means. Wow. Has this changed? I don't know if this is completely up to date. There might have been amendments and changes to it, but that's not explicitly collective self-defense. That's collective military cooperation, but it's not Article 5. Wow. Interesting. I would have thought that you would have more by now. That's surprising. Huh. He doesn't seem to grasp the countries relying on the U.S. For military protection, makes the U.S. more powerful. Yeah, I mean, he's very kind of like... He doesn't play multi-level games at the international level, that's for sure. He plays very traditional games. It's the seventh principle. The fear about the seventh principle is that it'll be aid rather than troops. Yeah, the wording of it does not require collective defense. It requires collective aid. The main issue with the EU forming its own defensive policies are issues of sovereignty and integration. Multiple countries having different ideas of what it looks like. Yep. And consensus is necessary for major European Union reform, right? So it's a problem. It's because the EU grew from economic cooperation, not a military alliance. Yeah, I mean, it was originally like what, the European steel and coal community, right? I mean, like it's purely economic, but it's evolved a lot and it's very different now. Do you feel that we need Greenland for national security like Trump said? Why on earth would we? What would we get out of owning Greenland right now as America, collectively, that we do not already have, given that we basically have a permanent lease of a military base there already? What is the strategic advantage of owning Greenland? The Northwest Passage, technically. Sure. And obviously, global warming is making kind of like northern maritime lanes and passages and the maritime reality of the northern hemisphere of the planet, like strategically very important, right? That's why Russia, and is part of like its concessions it's given to China in the Ukraine war for their continued aid, has given China for the first time pretty much ever in their history access to a lot of its northern shipping and strategic kind of regions. That's true. But explain to me why we don't already have like that with Alaska and our ability to project force due to our Navy, right? Like, what don't we have? Theoretically, we are a close ally of Denmark and therefore Greenland. So what do we not currently have that we would get by taking it? Because taking it's not a neutral act, right? Like, you can't just say, oh, we have it now and everything's the same as before. Even if we did it diplomatically, even if we paid for it, there would be a lot of consequences based on us taking it. So what do we gain? I mean, losses are obvious in terms of like, you know, political capital loss, alliance fragmenting, continuing and things like that. But what would we really get out of owning Greenland? What would be like the real advantage that we can't get another way or don't already have? That'd be my question back to you, I guess. The guy plays on story mode. Danish has been the most loyal ally of the US as well. We're very close allies. We're very close allies. I'm a master of security policies, so I can talk about this for hours, but it sucks to type. Yeah, right? No, I get you. Yeah, it's fascinating. And like there certainly are advantages. Because you could argue, I mean, if you want to really like just hammer down the realist perspective, which is certainly how Donald Trump operates internationally, I mean, an argument you could immediately make would be, well, if we don't own Greenland, what's to say in the future Europe doesn't drift away and become a real rival of America? Let's say they don't revoke our leases and licenses on military bases in Greenland. you know, and then we don't have access that way. That's one argument you could make. But I mean, my initial kind of like reaction to that is like, what the fuck do you have to do to piss Denmark off so much they're not willing to cooperate with America? What are we planning to do something that would make them that angry? Because if like you really got to struggle to piss off the Danes as America. We have historic cultural ties, we have historical military ties, we have historic economic ties. Denmark as a general rule is very cooperative in its foreign policy, at least post-Viking era, you know, in the modern context. Back in the day, they were maybe a little bit more aggressive and problematic, but in the modern context, right? So, I don't know. It seems, from my perspective, a lot of it comes down to a misunderstanding of kind of how America's modern military strategy for global military power projection works. Almost all of it comes from our alliances, our alliance structures, our military bases that we don't own, we lease because we have partnerships, like Okinawa, for example, right? Kind of like the cornerstone of that policy in Asia, if not the world. So, in my eyes, it comes up from just a misunderstanding of that. The main reason for the interest in Greenland are Arctic shipping routes, resources, and undersea cables, which are getting large amounts of attention from Russia and China. Yeah, and that's true. Russia and China definitely are really starting to look into the northern region, right? And Russia's given China the access that they didn't used to have and couldn't really have, which kind of creates a problem for the US strategically in that regards. But we've cooperated with Europe extensively in the past, and they're still fully willing to do that. So why is our strategy to kind of like burn bridges and potentially create another geostrategic threat and rival in that region that would happen if we kind of continue on our route with Europe, rather than just lean into the system that we kind of already have? I mean, there are resources up there too, that's true, but I don't know. The costs you pay for this politically are so fucking high. It's super easy, don't be a cunt. To a degree. Greenland also has large amounts of mineral resources that are estimated to be mineable in 40 years or so. Yeah. Canada does too, right? The northern regions of Canada have enormous mineral wealth that are becoming a lot more accessible given global warming. There's also going to be an enormous amount of arable land that's going to appear in southern Canada as a result of global warming and things like that to a degree. So there's an enormous amount of kind of like farmlands and stuff like that. I mean, global warming generally is definitely changing a lot of like resource strategy in places like that. I don't know. It's odd. We joked around that Americans might run out of meds. I think it's really going to happen. Doesn't Denmark own a major medicine distributor in America? I know the Dutch do. I don't know if the Danish do, Julio. Do you know the name of it? But again, kind of going back to what I was saying, I think the big thing though is just like, also, it's very kind of for show. Trump very much takes an approach, which isn't entirely about merit, right? Of kind of like public perspective and perception and like showing face and facade, right? If you look at his image, which is like, you know, gold everywhere, Mar-a-Lago, Trump Tower, all these places, it's like gold, and then underneath the surface, you know, it's cheap kind of thing, right? I don't mean that to disparage. I mean, a lot of people do that with presentation, right? You present a very polished exterior kind of to project power and kind of status and hierarchy and things like that, regardless of what's happening underneath the surface. Like his play with the Gulf of Mexico is very much in line with that. It's the same reason he's building the ballroom in DC. It's the same reason he's renaming things. It's the same reason, you know, he kind of takes a lot of his like strategic approaches he does diplomatically. For him, presentation is more important oftentimes than actual substance. Like the Gulf of Mexico, I think, is the same sort of strategic approach that results in him pursuing Denmark. For him, I think it's about the ability to kind of like put his name on Denmark or America's name on Denmark, because it kind of, it projects this image of power that for him matters a lot. And it's not inconsequential. It's just, it comes, I think, at a lot of other costs in a way, if that makes sense. Ozempic? Is Ozempic Danish? I didn't think they were. Novo Nordic? Ozempic company? Yeah, the Danes are going to have a very strong bargaining position in the case of Greenland, I think, because isn't almost all of Trump's like staff team on Ozempic? If the Danes have the ability to potentially cut off Ozempic to the entire West Wing, they have a pretty strong negotiating position, don't you think? Gulf of America, yeah, that's what I mean. But again, like it's about perspective, right? It's about framing. It's about language. The way I would describe Trump is an 18th century French absolute monarch attitude to the world. I don't think he plays quite that way. He's pretty unique. I mean, it's weird. I've never understood because like Trump is very intelligent when it comes to certain things, but he's such an idiot when it comes to others. And it's so weird because like when it comes to the understanding of communication, presentation, and understanding kind of how to frame things and how to see what I think people need, that he's very, very good at. Like he came from kind of a business background, and in terms of like raw competence, it wasn't very successful, but he did learn very well a particular set of skills. I mean, part of it came from like, you know, his mentorship and kind of who shaped him, right? But like Trump's business history, like, and kind of his approach to real estate, he did learn presentation very, very well. Grifting is one word. You could call it that, right? But you can also just call it presentation, and there's a lot of other ways you can put it a little bit more politely, but I agree with you in some ways. But that is a very particular set of skills. Like the whole narrative that Trump's like a complete idiot and is not skilled at certain things, that's a joke, right? If you understand, kind of even look a little bit about his history and how he operates, it's just so strange to see his competence with like being able to identify what people want, being able to like present very well, understanding how to frame and kind of set the tone for certain things. And then you kind of like compare that to his understanding and ability with like hard policy, hard analysis, hard implementation, hard follow through, and things like that. And at that, he's beyond naive and very bad at it. So it's very weird. And I think a lot of his foreign policy kind of follows that. He's very good at certain elements of it. But in kind of like, I think the long term, he just doesn't understand a lot of things. Or he doesn't maybe just give them any importance. It's very weird. So in that way, that's why I would say like I wouldn't equate him to like some historical, you know, kind of like French absolute monarchist. Maybe there's a few parallels, but you got to be very careful of generalities, right? He's very unique, for better and for worse in many ways. It's so weird. He's a very weird guy. He's a very weird president, and he's a very weird political figure. I don't like him, but I certainly don't have the hubris to pretend he's not very competent at certain things. I mean, he humiliated the Democratic Party beyond belief. You know, he's won big in certain things, but there's a lot of things he doesn't understand. It's so weird. I thought he came from an inheritance background. Yeah, those two go hand in hand. There's a big, you know, both I think causative and correlated connection between those two. I feel like Trump's Irish strategy is a mix of transactionalism, realism, and social media, and framing, right? I agree with you. It's not innately a mix that can't work. It's just, I think, missing things, right? You re-downloaded Dota 2 after 10 years of not playing. Felt like hitting a crack pipe and being clean for too long. Dude, my brother-in-law got me to re-download TFT, and I've been playing a bunch of that again. Same vibe. It's like crack. It's so addicting. I like Trump, and I much prefer him to Kamala Biden, but I'm not a fan of everything he does. What he did to Harvard sickened me. Oh God, yeah, the coercion. I was surprised to see him, of all people, attack freedom of speech, being that he himself has been a freedom of speech attacked pretty often by the left. Yeah, definitely pretty hypocritical in that regard. Are we going back to the game? Yeah, we are. We'll keep playing. It's interesting though. I absolutely agree that Trump has very good skills in terms of reading the room, understanding people's needs and wants, and identifying problems. But I would say he is narcissistic and does not even take advice from advisors much of the time, putting him very much out of his depth in many of these advanced niche areas. Yeah, I think part of it is definitely the people he surrounded himself with. I don't know the inner workings of kind of like Trump's cabinet. No one does really, right? You get secondhand information. It's very tough to tell. He certainly has competent aides. Stephen Miller is a piece of work, but he's very competent. But in terms of people who can give him good advice, he drove a lot of them out, right? I mean, like in his first presidency, a lot of his appointments, I certainly didn't like them, but they were competent and they were capable of giving him good advice. A good example of that was, what's his name? Like Rex Tillerson, right? I think his name was. He would have given a very good advisor to Trump, and he ended up getting pushed out very quickly. And, you know, the kind of hallmark of any good leader is always the ability to kind of reassess, reevaluate, and to take advice from competent people, optimally people more competent than you. And I think that is, I agree with you, one of the things that he's not very good at. I can't think of anyone on his staff right now who really is capable of giving him alternative positions. There's competent people on his staff. There's no disputing that. But people who can give him good advice that's not going to innately kind of just feed into his own, you know, kind of perspective, which is a problem. You really do need that as a leader. I think Xi Jinping suffers from a bit of that, but for very different reasons, right? One of my coworkers put it in a piece of pipe on Friday, super bloody crooked. I told him it was straight as a Republican senator. He didn't like that. No, I wouldn't imagine he would. Do you feel like this has been a big schism amid MAGA with the Epstein list? Yeah, definitely. Marjorie Taylor Greene's kind of the harbinger of that, isn't she, in some ways? Like the big fallout between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Trump. I think there is the beginnings of a schism in MAGA, but it's very complicated. Jean Lezing, leader of the Village Interests, has made a remarkable play for power in the capital in order to secure a spot for the Village Interests within the government. However, it's not entirely clear if they should be rewarded for their novel tactics. We don't really want the Village Interest in power, so we will not support that at all. We got an authority deficit too. I'm going to take off one of our decrees. Somewhere here. We'll do Sion. Still working on iron. How's our market? We've reduced the iron deficit a little bit, but there's still a lot. We also need to work on paper, because paper is going to be one of our biggest costs in terms of our administration. Famine in Oxa has sparked criticism of Great Qing's economic policies of isolationism. Yeah, well, let's continue with self-sufficiency. We would not care at all about that. I mean, have you ever done a Vietnam playthrough? No, not at all. Not in Vic 3, and not in Hoi 4, I don't think either. People around Trump feel much more ideologically convinced than him. I agree. I don't view Trump as innately ideological, which is a point in his favor. I think that's a positive thing. I mean, it's got two sides, right? Being not ideological can mean you're like adaptive and dynamic with like policy and perspective and willingness to kind of like look at a situation for what it is and not have the blinders of ideology, because I think ideology is a pretty toxic thing innately. But the other side of it is kind of like just a lack of real kind of like beliefs and understandings. I think there's kind of two sides to it. It's good and bad. Populous base of Confucian scholars has turned against supporting foreign entanglements. Pressure from within has led to the group distancing themselves from the anti-Russian association. Sure. Again, we don't really have a strong foreign policy. We generally dislike Russia, but we would not go out of our way or anything. So now we're back to the game. Would we be able to roleplay as a reformer for the Emperor or the next one? I'm not going to do a roleplay. Like, we're not doing heavy roleplay on this one, Magus. Hold your roleplay energy for the continuation of the Grand Campaign. We're going to have plenty of that going forward there. This is kind of more like casual. I'm trying to play with a bit of realism and historical understanding, but like not outright do full-on roleplay, right? Our standard of living has dropped a little bit. It's fine. They may not be able to eat iron, but they can burn wood, so it's not all bad. A lot of that, so we have a giant deficit of fruit. We don't have, I think, access to like really good forms of tooling, so our agrarian modes of production are just god awful. We do have dyes though, so I'm going to switch us to dye workshops. We got that. That'll help a little bit with our clothing deficit. We only have 16 clothing factories in all of China. Absurd. We'll go to Lay's as well. I think that should be useful. We actually don't have a furniture deficit, so I don't know how. Yeah, it'll be profitable. We need definitely more food industries too, so we'll go to sweeteners for now. Fishing trawlers. We don't have a lot of clippers. We need to build more shipbuilding industry, to be honest. Same with that. Lack of tools. Tools are a huge issue. Glasswork we actually don't have. It's not very profitable, probably because our urban centers aren't using glass. There's not a lot of demand for it. Let's see if we can switch that. Because public services will probably help with standard of living, and I think we can't afford it. So let's take a look here. It actually is on market squares. Wow. Okay. Never mind. We're making ceramics. They're just not going to be profitable. It's fine. We're still a way out from mechanical tools. That's going to be like the big jump off for us in terms of like industrial production. So we continue to build more iron mines. He's a textbook case of narcissism. You're right. He's very intelligent despite his reputation, but his compulsion to be the center of attention undermines his rationality. Yeah, a great example of that I think is Mamdani. It's been very funny to watch, right? Trump really likes Mamdani and he wants Mamdani to like him, which is so interesting. I remember reading like the morning of the Maduro situation or the afternoon that Mamdani had called Trump about the situation to like complain about it. My first thought was like, why the fuck is Trump answering the calls of a New York City mayor? What? And a lot of that it's the same as like all the rest of this, right? Is it like perception and like a desire to be liked? Part of it's narcissistic, part of it's just human. I think Trump very much does have a compulsion to be liked very deeply, which is why you see things like that. It's very weird. It's very strange. It's a company called Novo Nordisk. They make the #1 diabetic meds in America, Ozempic. That's definitely a bargaining chip if I've ever heard one for Greenland. If you take Greenland from us, we're going to embargo Ozempic. Definitely that should definitely be on the bingo card of like modern global politics, that's for sure. Does Ozempic become a key bargaining chip in the future of Greenland's sovereignty? Is Ozempic the deciding factor in Greenland continuing to be Danish? Yeah, that definitely checks out with his timeline. How did the Chinese react to Russia becoming a huge empire on their border? General dislike, wariness, but like mixed emotions, because the Russians also cleaned out a lot of like the steppe tribes and fought the steppe tribes that had been harassing China for basically ever, right? So convenient until they weren't convenient anymore. So initial kind of, I'd say, ambivalence followed by general wariness. Did the Ming or Qing try to stop Russian expansion towards the Pacific? Not really. I don't think so. Not until like I can't think of any cases. Does anyone know differently? I don't believe so. I mean, like the Qing and China generally just fought more and more kind of wars of expansion and subjugation of the steppe tribes, but Russia was doing the same thing. My understanding is that like China kind of saw the steppe nomads as such an existential danger due to historical trauma, if nothing else, that they kind of like, they didn't kind of view Russia's rise as like kind of existential for that reason. I might misunderstand that though. What's a famine? Trump has clearly fallen in love with Maduro and is this kidnapped him in a toxic act of selfish desire. That sounds like something you'd see on South Park these days. I did a playthrough of Terra Invicta. I did like it. I was really hopeful for it, but I ended up just really not liking the mechanisms that they chose to play with it at the end of things. It's an okay game, but I probably don't plan to play it again in the future personally, or certainly for streaming. China didn't fight a lot of people in general. There was almost no interstate like combat between China and other countries historically. I mean, China in a modern context talks about that in terms of foreign policy, and they're not wrong. It certainly is very underselling of the soft power they've exercised throughout history on other states and countries and regions. But in terms of direct military interventionism, they have not done much historically. I feel like there is some insane mega campaign potential for Terra Victa and Hoi Formonium Dawn. It'd be interesting, but Terra Victa just it's not about like, I don't know. I don't like the operative mechanics. I don't kind of like the inner kind of like the organizations they choose to kind of like be how you play the game around. It's just very weird. Isolated incidents and border skirmishes. Yeah, there's been plenty of those, but not outright kind of fighting. Didn't China also send some troops in the Russian Civil War as well? I know the Japanese did. With like the interventionist groups from like all those different countries. I forget if China did. There were some border wars between Russia and the Qing, but then it all happened at once when Russia seized Manchuria and the Vladivostok. Is there a specific mod list for Vic 3 that you've been using for solo RP? There's certainly a lot of different mods I have on right now. The two big ones I'll tell you to just always play that are stable and you can play well together in Victoria 3. Better Politics mod and Morgan Rada. Those two mods alone make the game transformatively better. So I just recommend those two and then anything else that works with them. I always recommend economic, what's it called? The economic mod as well, the big one, but it's pretty complicated. If you play with Morgan Rod and Better Politics, the game's already very, very good. The Wan sent an expeditionary force into Mahapajit, but it wasn't a formal war, was it? My understanding, because I've read like a good amount of like the part of Kang's book and then some of his articles, Kang, who's like a Confucian Chinese scholar, his whole claim is that there's only been like, I think 2 major Chinese interstate wars historically up until the 19th century, which was, there was the Korean War of Japan that happened, and then there was the attempted conquest of Japan by like Mongol Wan era China, right? I think it was Mong, or was it Wan, or was it Ming? But there's been lots of like little wars and like conflicts with like groups that we wouldn't consider to be states. If you want to consider tribe states, China's fought a lot of wars historically, but a lot of their conflicts have always been like with steppe nomads and stuff, which like, you know, I think a lot of modern people don't really consider like states. So it's very weird because China's existential threat, and the reason that they've probably never really been able to kind of like consider real expansion in like Southeast Asian other regions, is because they've always kind of had the existential threat they've had their back against, right? Which is like the Great Steppe Highway. Always been existential for them. So it is weird. Morgan Rata. It's called Morgan Rata. It's this mod right here. Let me find the name. Morgan Rata. Fantastic mod. Should be base game. There's for sure up the table, and the Portuguese just said use half of the North Atlantic as a free pass. I just hope our Navy generally wins the presidential elections in 10 days. Our naval general. Oh, Portugal's got elections right now? Interesting. Since the pandemic. There's also the new president of Spain, right? What's his name? I forget. Pedro Sanchez. Is that? Or... Were there just elections in Spain, or am I misremembering? I didn't hear much from China at all, but I recently have made friends in Mongolian native, and he says there's still major aggression between Chinese and tribal groups. It's been 600 years. It's been a lot longer than 600 years, Scythe. Try 2,000 to 3,000, maybe? Pushing 3,000 years, maybe? Something like that. 2,000 at the very least. 2,500 for sure. 3,000 maybe. A bizarre cult society is formed in the mountains of Guangxi, calling themselves the God-worshipping society. This group was first by the former teacher named Feng Yunshan, and preaches the beliefs of who claims to be a younger brother of the Christian figure Jesus Christ. They have managed to build a significant following among the Hakka locals. Sure is that our sins surge up to heaven. How good to know that Jesus bears them all on our behalf. No longer trusting in the demon devils, we obey the holy word, worshiping the one true Lord to cultivate our heart. Peculiar. Certainly not going to be relevant for us in the future. We can ignore it. 600 years the last time they had a major war. Oh, Yeah, you're right. Well, it would have been later than that, right? Because I mean, like, the Qinglong Emperor also did a number of steppe invasions. That would have been in the 1700s, like the late 1700s. Those were pretty much outright wars. The 1700s, right? The Qinglong Emperor's expansions in the steppe. I think that was like the 1780s. Where the hell is your beard? It's gone, like ashes on the wind. All the Mongolians had to do was treat the Chinese like actual human beings, and maybe the one would have lasted a little bit longer than it did. Yeah, but they got sinicized too, so it's pretty fucking funny. I think you're asking a lot of the Mongolians at that time to be humane or reasonable. They still did get sinicized, though. It's the funny part. Alrighty. More iron mines. What's our deficit looking like right now? 187. We're looking a lot better. Tools are now going to be our big issue, so let's start building some tools. I'm probably going to center a lot of that on Beijing or Shanxi. I think we've got already 6 in Beijing, so we're getting throughput bonuses for that. Oh, we're also running out of market access already. Fuck, we need railways. I didn't see that. I built too much here. I wasn't paying attention. Do we have the infrastructure decree we can do? Fuck, we do. Yeah, I overbuilt. God damn it. And we don't have railways yet either. We can't do a coastal port there. That's a fuck up. I'm going to hold on to that a little bit. We've got decrees. Railways, I'm going to actually push very quickly. But we still got... not as long as I expected. We can probably get there in around 7 years, which is 1850. But our infrastructures will be a problem till then. I've had mods before that let you build things for infrastructure, but I don't think I have them on, so that's a problem. The Mongolians were pros at assimilating into people they conquered. Yeah. Tingrism was also very kind of innately synchronizable. What is that fucking word? Like with religious synchronization? I tried. You know, the funniest thing about the First World War is that some random baron from Russia is the reason Mongolia is an independent state instead of being Russia or China. Yeah, you mean, you played lots of Kaiserreich, I assume, Mongoose. Yeah. It's interesting. It's based on a very real history. I think a lot of people, a lot of steppe peoples that conquered China, though, the Jurchen and the Khitan, to name a few. Yeah, it happened numerous times throughout history. Usually they just conquer, raid, take tribute, and leave, though. It was much more rare for them to kind of overrun China as a whole and try to administer. Portuguese centrist by the name of Zoran, a teeny more conservative than America. Huh. Portuguese elections. Luis Marquis, Antonio Jose Seguro, and then Andre Ventura. Yeah. Sousa's incumbent. What's the polling data like right now? What a later Jin dynasty. Never pushed into southern China. They were fine with exacting tribute. Yeah. That's one thing you got to give credit to, like, the steppe tribes, and especially the Mongols with. They understood the power of tributary systems, and sometimes you don't need to directly rule. Sometimes it's just more costly than beneficial. All right, iron, and then we're going to build tooling. We've maxed out tooling there. What's our infrastructure like in these other provinces? Tight. We'll build tooling in Shanxi for now because we've got a bit of leg room there. Then again, if we build in Beijing, we can always upgrade our infrastructure with ports. And we have a lot of credentialed population there to begin with. We'll split it a little bit. That's what we'll do. So It's so profitable there is the thing. We don't have the infrastructure. So, all right, I'll do Shenzi, and then we'll build in Beijing. They're not very profitable. Why is that? Because iron's very expensive in Beijing, probably because of our infrastructure issues. Problem is I can't build more infrastructure in Shenzi until we get railroads. Yikes. It's gonna be a problem. We'll go for that for now. We aren't running a deficit. No, we make a lot of tax income. And we have a pretty big surplus in the treasury too. It's all that silver we're getting off the Europeans because they didn't invade us. We also do need a little bit more government administration. I'll build a couple more in Beijing there. And what else do we want to work on? Primarily industrial goods. Tooling. We're going to get mechanical tools soon, so we want to work on steel shortly. Coal, we need a lot of coal mines, but we don't directly need it yet. Paper wouldn't be a bad idea. That'll bring down our governmental costs. They're not too big of a problem yet, though. Groceries for quality of life. Just tools. It's our big problem. So crazy that I know 10 more about historical politics than modern politics. It's not that weird. You are watching a strategy game stream of Victoria 3, so, you know, and you play strategy games. Teaches you a lot more about history than a modern context. In my final U4 campaign, I made most of mainland China Dutch. Did you actually? It's disgusting. Historical politics also have hindsight. Modern politics are constantly in flux. That's true. Hindsight is very much 2020. There's, I think, an innate stress of looking at modern politics and modern context and history in general, too, because you're living in it. Which kind of very much changes the equation and how you look at it. 26, hold on. I may have to stop the stream here in just a moment. Alright, I'll play like 5-10 more minutes and then we'll wrap up here. I stopped watching the news because half the stuff... Yeah, news is so hard to watch nowadays. It's never been that great, but it's very difficult to find... Because it's important, like, the news serves a very particular process and function for people, right? Like, it's supposed to give you the ability to kind of understand the environment that you're in and what's constantly going on around you. But nowadays, it's so hard to find, like, accuracy. Especially with AI. I mean, AI is making it worse. The consolidation of media companies into, you know, the same thing is brutal. Mais vale prevenir do que remediar. There's more value to planning ahead than to finding out. Very old saying here. I kind of want that timeline. Planning is very important. There's more value to planning ahead than to finding out. Huh. That's a weird phrasing, though. Finding out in what context? Planning ahead than finding out. They're both important. Why, like, what's, like, so it's like an idiom, right? An old one, probably, like Portuguese, right, Julio? Why is planning, like, contextually more important than finding out? Like, why, comparatively, I'm curious. News is not news, it's propaganda. That's how I see it. That's one side. Yeah, I mean, everything's political. There's a really good Deleuze, I think it's a Deleuze quote, right? Gilles Deleuze. I've read a lot of him recently, or tried to. Gilles Deleuze is the one writer who's ever made me truly struggle to understand what they're writing. I pride myself as having the ability, with time and effort, to understand pretty much anyone. And the only person who's ever challenged that is Giles Deleuze. But his books are also about as close as you can get to actual sorcery books in the modern context, so it's worth it. But still, anyway, where was I going with that? Yeah, he had the idea that basically everything is political, same as Foucault, but anything that appears not to be political is even more political than what appears to be political, right? And the news is definitely a case of that, right? And especially any news network which is telling you they're not political, or is pretending to not be political, they're even more political, right? Which I think there's a lot of truth to. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors and all that sort of thing. I'll go up to speed 4 for the last little bit here too. We'll play a bit more of the game. More government administrations. So we have a bit of a deficit of those. I'll make them up. Prioritize them. Then we're going to be done with tooling. We can't build steel plants yet, right? No. We can build steel mills, but I don't think we have a production method for tooling. How long until we get that? 27 months. This will give us steel tools, right? Yeah. We can't really build steel mills before them because we have no demand for them and we're not exporting. So I guess we'll just wait. We want to build up like the basic kind of infrastructure. Same with coal. I'd love to build a ton of coal. We actually can build coal mines. There will be demand for it because coal as a good and commodity in Victoria 3 is also used for heating, I think, right? So we can actually start to develop our coal mines and there will be demand for it. So I think I'm gonna develop. There's a few provinces that have coal bonuses here, but we're completely out of infrastructure, so that's not an option. Coal mines in Beijing. Coal fields in Shenzi. We built a bunch of tooling there, though. We have room. We'll build some more coal in Shenzi and then in Beijing as well directly. Ooh. I guess not very profitable very quickly. I'm happy to even subsidize it because as soon as we get atmospheric engines, I'm going to switch to coal production methods. We got 60 years under Spanish rule. We had a plan to defend, but we let the Spanish house to marry one of our houses. Braganza, House of Braganza, right? Will it happen because we never thought we would lose because of marriage? Huh. I remember that. What century was that in? Was it 1600s or 1700s? I'm trying to remember. Will you be continuing the grand campaign? Yes, I will, Tron. I'm waiting for Fallen Eagle to update right now. So keep an eye on the Discord. I've got all the information and stuff on it there. But yeah, just waiting for Fallen Eagle, pretty much. I also realized we hadn't incorporated all these states yet. We need a lot more bureaucracy so we can do some integration. Then again, I don't think we would really do that, would we? as the Qing? Probably in the West, but not in the East. So we need a lot more governmental administrations. Yeah, just waiting on Fallen Eagle. This campaign's kind of just a placeholder till then. It's interesting. I want to do a bit of a casual playthrough, but I'm holding all my roleplay energy and waiting for the grand campaign to come back. Why not build a gold mines? It's free money. Yeah, it is, but we don't really suffer from money right now. Our problem right now is not taxation, revenue, or income. Our problem right now is a lack of baseline production and industrial goods, right? We have a commodity problem, we don't have a wealth problem. We have a surplus of capital, right? Our investment pool is 34 million right now. We have enormous revenue that outpaces our expenses. Our problem is a lack of like actual industrial infrastructure. That's what we're missing. So that's why I'm trying to like work on even slightly less profitable things like coal mines now, because we're prepping for the industrial pivot. A lot of American media are just talking suits or whatever side they lean on. It's a lot globally too nowadays, unfortunately. It sucks. Yeah, we lack goods. We lack commodities. We lack means of production. We lack good avenues of capital. The source of cholera outbreak in Beijing has been traced to an ingenious surgeon apothecary. This has led to great advancements in the field of public health. One of the cool things about the Morgenrada mod is it has like a whole system for disease mechanics and stuff like that, which is really cool. Gold mines, if like in Victoria 3, gold mines are generally a very good idea. For almost any other country or situation, I would just immediately build gold mines for the money, right? But for us, I'd rather use that IC, like the production, on more industrial buildings and goods and time that will scale our industrialization pivot, because we have to do it very quickly, right? So I didn't get an answer before. What's the current GC? It's the Torres one for last year. No, if you go to like my my second YouTube channel, like Hammurabae 2, I think it's called, the live streams there from our second grand campaign, the second grand campaign are still there if you want to catch up on them. But it was an Arthurian start date, began in Fallen Eagle in, I think it was 376 or 476. And ended up having a dead save because mod issues and stuff like that. But I'm going to be continuing it. So it's Arthurian, starting off in like basically post-Roman Britain and things like that. It's been pretty spicy. So it'll be a continuation of that. I haven't seen this. Hammurabi 2. Yeah, if you see like my YouTube channel, I have like a connection to like my VOD channel where I did a lot of those streams, I think, on there. And if you look at the live videos, they're all in there. Fucking Nat and Leo, damn right. Also, on that note, I do need to end here. Bit of a shorter stream today. I have something after this. I'll stream again next weekend, probably for the full amount of time as well. That'll be my last stream before school starts. I return to classes a week from tomorrow. But yeah, the plan for streaming right now is I'm probably just going to do a lot of chill streams like this. Probably just a lot of chatting, playing games kind of casually in the middle. But really right now we're waiting on the grand campaign to continue on the Fallen Eagle. I don't want to commit to like another big kind of high effort campaign until then, because it's kind of going to be the plan going forward. So hopefully Fallen Eagle updates soon. I have to do all my edits. I have to do testing with the mod pack that I have as well and all those sorts of things. So we'll see. Fingers crossed. I'll let you know in the Discord as well and on future streams. Hope everyone had a good weekend, enjoyed, and I will chat with you guys soon.